Hi, everyone. My name is John Bristowe. I'm the Community Director for Octopus Deploy. Welcome to this edition, the July edition, 2024, of Octopus 101. If this is your first time seeing Octopus, or you've never heard of Octopus before and you've been given an invite from a friend, hey, go check out this webinar, don't worry, you're in the right place. What this is a webinar to help you understand what Octopus is, how it works, why we created it, and all the things that it does. So I'd like to start by thanking you for your time and attention. This is a live webinar, so feel free to take advantage of the Q&A pane or comments section to let us know where you're joining us from. We got some folks here from awesome. We got folks from Germany, which is awesome. Donna from Toronto, go Leafs go. There you go. I'm joining you from Australia, so welcome. If you have any questions at any time, feel free to submit them to the comments pane. This is a live webinar. I'm happy to answer them during the course of this discussion or this conversation. And again, this is really an introduction or a primer to Octopus Deploy. So if you haven't done anything with continuous delivery or continuous deployments, and you're looking for a solution to help you do just that, this is a great solution for that. So what I'd like to do is begin our conversation by sharing with you a few notes. So let me jump over to, through the magic of software, jump over to my slides. So if you need to reach me, you can reach me at this email address here. I'm happy to answer your questions. And again, feel free to submit any questions you have to the comments pane. So let's set the agenda. What are you going to learn during this webinar? So first and foremost, we're going to show you, we're going to talk a little bit about how Octopus works. And we're going to also talk about why you should use it. That's often a really good thing to cover when talking about technology, is not only the how, but the why. The why really helps you understand, okay, I get it. There's a reason for this technology. Then we're going to focus a little bit on what we like to call Octopus fundamentals. So with any software, there's a set of taxonomy or terms that you have to understand, and Octopus is no different. So we have terms like projects and deployment processes and releases. Don't worry if they don't mean anything to you right now. By the end of this webinar, you'll learn what those things are, and you'll know what those things are, and you'll be able to, start kicking the tires of Octopus with those concepts in mind. The third thing, and probably the most important thing we'll do, is we'll show you how to create what we call a deployment process. The deployment process for, rather than getting to the specifics right now, a deployment process is basically what are the steps necessary to get my software from point A to point B. And that's really important because that's essentially why you use a deployment tool. And then finally, we'll take a look at how you might trigger some deployments through a variety of tools, CI processes and servers. So CI stands for continuous integration. It's kind of what a lot of folks call a build server. So a CI process or server, an example of this might be GitHub Actions, but there are many, many CI solutions out there. GitLab, GitHub, TeamCity, Azure DevOps. There's tons and tons of solutions out there. So don't worry, we're going to talk a little bit about that. But by the end of this webinar, hopefully you'll have a solid understanding of all of these things. So let's talk a little bit about what deployments look like today and why you might want to use a tool like Octopus to do them. So let's imagine this is a scenario where you as the developer or DevOps engineer are responsible for deploying apps to a variety of machines or targets. So on the left-hand side, we have our app. On the right-hand side, we have our customers who want to use that app. And somewhere in the middle is you and a set of deployment scripts that you use to deploy your app from point A to point B. So an app is a collection of files, typically binaries that you'll ship from maybe a machine, and you'll push them into production through a variety of means. You'll hopefully use a set of deployment scripts to do this, because deployment scripts allow you to do that in a repeatable process, and you'll move those into production. So happy life, everything's great. But as we all know, software tends to evolve and software requirements change. And so the reality is that not only do you have a set of new customers that come on board, but you have new versions of that software, or you may have new environments of that software. Imagine, if you will, you have a website. That website could look different for different types of customers. So in the scenario that we've laid out, we have V1 for, say, a customer 1, but we may have V2 for customer 2. Customer 2 could be, any type of customer. It could be a customer based on a region, could be a customer based on a type, the type of customer that they are. So you may have a set of different customer types defined within your application. You may want to deploy different versions for that. A third example might be, say, customer 3, a different cohort of customer may have version 3. And so now, as you can see, your expression on your face has changed a little bit. You're not so happy anymore. And so the reason why is because it's getting difficult to manage. Your deployment scripts start to balloon out. And, also there's no concept of rollbacks here. What if a deployment fails? What do you do in the instance where customer 2 needs version 1, for example? And so you can see that as we evolve this process, things get really, really gnarly. So your head kind of explodes here with the complexity of everything that gets involved. We have different environments that we have to deploy to. We have different versions. We have different types of customers. Did we ship the right version of a version of software? How do we do a rollback if things fail? This doesn't even account for things like databases. Oh my God, this is too complex. Please help. And that's really where Octopus Deploy comes involved. So the way we like to describe Octopus Deploy is it makes complex deployments easy. And so the idea here is that you use a tool like Octopus Deploy for that exact reason. And so now deployment is managed through a process through Octopus. It's basically a single pane of glass. It's a single deployment automation platform. And it is your source of truth for managing all your enterprise deployment processes with consistency and compliance. Those two things are really important when we talk about Octopus. Consistency, I have a consistent manner in which I do my deployments, so it does it the same way each and every time. So I have assurance that it's going to work, or even if it doesn't, I have a means of rolling that back automatically. And compliance, which is who did what, where, and when. So who did the deployment? Why did they do the deployment potentially? When did they do the deployment? Those things are really, really important, that sort of auditing capability. So that's really the reason why I use a tool like Octopus Deploy, is to move you away from that sort of crazy world of managing our deployment scripts. That world does exist, by the way. So when we think of Octopus Deploy, we have to think of it in terms of a pipeline. So typically when people describe CI/CD, they do so in the context of a pipeline. So the pipeline, you can imagine it's a left to right pipeline. And as you move from left to right, you move further away from the developer. So the developer starts off by possibly managing tasks within a product like Jira, for example. It doesn't have to be Jira, but it could be Jira. Then they do source control changes in a product like GitHub or GitLab. They may use Azure DevOps. Doesn't matter. Then as part of that plan, develop, and then next stage is build, they may use a CI process like GitHub Actions or some other form of build process. Finally, on the other end of the pipeline, the right side of the pipeline is your target, or where you deploy to. That could be Azure, it could be any type of, really, it could be on the metal, you could be deploying directly to IIS, you could deploy directly to Apache, it really doesn't matter. We like to think of this pipeline as a largely solved sort of space. There are many, many solutions for many of these sort of aspects of the pipeline. The one that we feel has not been solved, however, is the deployment piece. That is really where I think a lot of products tend to fall down. So, yes, there are solutions for doing deployments within the context of some of these products, but they really don't do a great job of deployment in a really strong way. They don't have a really strong notion of what are called environments. Rollbacks are really not a thing. So there's lots of missing parts and pieces to that space. And so that's where we feel like we do a really good job is in that space there, is in the deployment space. And, the reality is that we're not ignorant to the fact that your pipeline itself will have lots of parts and pieces to it. So you may use a product like TeamCity as opposed to GitHub. You may use Jenkins. You may want to deploy to a variety of different cloud providers like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, on the metal, VMs, Kubernetes. There's lots and lots of ways in which you can do deployments. And so we have to be cognizant of that. So that's where a solution like Octopus Deploy comes in. We're aware of a lot of those different targets. We're aware of a lot of those different CI solutions, and we integrate with all of them. And so we provide you this sort of single solution for doing all your deployments. In addition to that, we also recognize the fact that there are a variety of other scenarios whereby you want to provision infrastructure or approve deployments. We have integration pieces for that as well. So there you go. Like that's the what of Octopus Deploy, as well as the why of Octopus Deploy. Let's now focus our attention to the how of Octopus Deploy, and by means of a demo. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my demo environment here. And so what I have here is a bunch of tabs open. I'm just going to basically run through a lot of things here, but If you have any questions in the meantime, you can feel free to submit one. I'll stop and we'll answer it right there. So if you want to check out our website, this is at octopus.com. You'll see a website that looks like this. This is what basically describes our product. You can sign up for a free trial. You can sign up for a free trial today. You can download our software, or you can run it in the cloud. I'm running the demos that you'll see here in the cloud. So this is a managed solution that we provide, but you can certainly run this on your own infrastructure if you wish. So let me jump over here to my environment, and what you'll see here is what we call the dashboard. So the Octopus dashboard is your single pane of glass, so to speak. It's your first stop and probably your most popular view within Octopus. In this view, you're going to see a set of projects, and inside those projects, you're going to see the various environments that I'm deploying to. So in this instance, development, staging, and production. Now, we don't have to call it those things, but these are sort of canonical names, but you can certainly call it whatever you wish. But the idea here is that we have a set of projects, and by simply glancing at this, I can see where my various projects are at in terms of their deployments, what versions those deployments are at, whether they've succeeded or failed. And I can take a look at a variety of other options as well. This is one example of what the dashboard may look like. Another example of what the dashboard may look like is something like this. So you can see I have a variety of projects in here with various versions, with different types of environments, etc. But just to give you a sense of what this looks like, I'm going to start here with a pretty simple example. On the top left-hand corner here, you'll see we have this drop-down list. This is called spaces. Spaces is a isolation boundary. Basically, if you want to isolate projects from each other, if you want to be able to, say, give different teams their own workspace, so to speak, for defining their projects and their deployment processes, you can define a space. And so let's go ahead and add a new space. And I'll just call this space name Hello Octopus. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to make myself the administrator for this, and we'll click on Save. Now we're creating basically a blank space. So if we go into that space that's been created here, you'll see an environment that looks like this. So this is blank space. We're going to start from scratch just to show you what this looks like. So first things first, we'll go ahead and create a new project. So we'll create a new project here, and we'll say this is our July website. Maybe we're creating a website here. Notice in here I have a few options. So one of the first options that we have is being able to use this within the context of source control. So when we create projects, we're writing it to a database that we control, that you have access to, obviously. But a lot of customers or a lot of folks want to be able to persist a lot of values to source control. The reason why is because when you have something available in text and you have a source control process that controls that, it turns out to be really easy to make changes. So you can write all the changes that you're making to a project, for example, to source control and persist it as a text file. So you don't have to write to a database if you don't want. I can specify a variety of other aspects here as well, but let's just go ahead and click Save and create a new project. So the first thing it's going to ask me is, okay, you've created a new project. The first thing we need to do is we need to create a set of environments. So environments are basically the way that we organize all the services and all the servers that we have within our mix of infrastructure that we're going to deploy to. So we've provided 3 by default. You don't have to use these if you don't want. You can give these any name that you wish. We've defined these ones as such. Let's just go ahead and assume the defaults and click Save. Now that we have our environments defined, you'll notice over on the top here, you can see we have our project defined, we have our environments defined. The next thing to define is our deployment process. And this is really at the heart of what Octopus does. This is a deployment process, as I said, is a series of steps that are run to do a deployment. So let's take a look at what this is. So we can start by either clicking this button here to create a process from scratch, or we can choose an example out of the box if we wish. These are very bare bone examples, but let's go ahead and have some fun and create a process from scratch. And this is going to kick me over into what we call the process editor. The process editor is a sort of WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, experience for defining your deployment processes. So down here you can see we have a variety of steps in this center area here. These are defined by category. So we have our featured steps here in the right hand side. So I can do things like deploy a Helm chart, run a script, which incidentally is our most popular step. We have other steps as well, like run an Azure script, deploy a package, deploy to IIS, etc. These are some of our most popular steps that we have in the product. if I want to, I can drill down on each one of these and I can see the various steps that we have for each one of these categories. So if I'm deploying to Kubernetes, or I'm deploying to Azure, or I'm deploying to Google Cloud, or let's say I'm targeting AWS, these and other types of steps I can use in the context of a deployment process. So much like a recipe, when you bake a cake, for example, you run a series of steps like grab the eggs, put them in a bowl, beat them, add flour, then add sugar. These are a series of steps that you for doing a deployment process. So run a script, deploy a database, update, add permissions, etc. So let's go ahead and add a step to our deployment process. I'm going to add the most popular one we have called run a script. This is basically full control. This allows you to run a script step as part of your deployment process. So what we'll see here is when you add a step inside of this well area here, you'll see it will list a bunch of steps one after the other. So here we're running a script and we're just executing that. So you'll see the steps occur here one after another. Now steps they run one after each other, but you can have them run in parallel if you wish. You can have other steps that run based on conditions. You can have steps that only run in certain environments, and you'll see a lot of this stuff as we go through this. But run a script is basically run a series of commands that are defined in a script. That script is defined here. So I have a number of options here. I can say that the script source is either inline, or it comes from a Git repository, or it comes from a package. A package is like a zip archive or some kind of file that I upload to Octopus. So I can use a package repository within Octopus, and then from there I can just pick and choose things that I want. Like I can say it's inside this package, use this script, and away you go. I'm going to use an inline script here. So you can see I have an inline editor experience here that supports a variety of languages. So I can use PowerShell, Bash, etc. In addition to that, when I'm defining my script here, I can do a variety of options if I wish, but I can also inline here a bunch of variables. So deployment variables are really powerful because they allow you, this is something that often changes as you do a deployment. So if you haven't done a deployment before, that's fine, but you may notice that if you have done deployments, things vary from environment to environment. So as you go from development to staging to production, things will change. And so often you want to express those things as variables. So I can utilize those variables here in the context of my script if I so choose. And these and other sorts of things you can certainly control as part of this. You can see I have a variety of other options as well. And I can define things like conditions. So I can specify what environments this script step will run, whether or not I want this script to run if the previous one succeeded or failed, or will always run. So you can see there's lots of knobs and buttons to this. But the point being is that when you go ahead and run a deployment, it will run these scripts. It will run these steps as part of a process that you've defined. Now, if I wanted to, I could certainly discard these changes here, and I can use an example just to show you what this looks like. So here's an example where we output some console output here. So you can see I'm writing here to the console, and I can do all variety of options here. I'll utilize these as part of this deployment. You can see I have a bunch of settings here that I've defined, and let's go ahead and add an additional step. So just to kind of showcase like what this looks like in the well here, I can add another script step here if I wanted to. You can see here, inside here, I'm building out my process for my deployment. So let's go ahead and just discard this one. I'm not going to use this one. And now what we're going to do is move to the next step and create what we call a release. So we've defined our deployment process. Arguably, it's very simple, and that's the point. It's a 101 demo. But our deployment process, let's imagine, if you will, it's a hugely complex deployment process consistent of tens of steps, maybe hundreds of steps. We do have customers that utilize tens and hundreds of steps, by the way, as part of a deployment process. The next thing you want to do is define what's called a release. Now, remember earlier I said we are going to have to learn a lot of terms. This is one of them. A release is not typically what you would think of as a release. Most folks would think as like I'm actually shipping the software to production. A release in the context of Octopus is you're defining what we call a snapshot. Now, what is a snapshot? A snapshot is a persistent version of your deployment with all the variables, with all the packages, with everything that goes into creating a release. And it's essentially a snapshot of all those values into a version number. So the version number I can specify here. I can use semantic versioning if I want, but basically this is the version of the release that I'm creating. I'm going to specify release notes. These release notes, by the way, can also come from Git commits if I wanted to, so I can auto-generate these if I wanted, but let's go ahead and just assume 0.0.1. The next thing that will happen is once I've defined my release, I have this release version now. The next thing that will happen is allow me to define how those things go into my environments, what we call a life cycle. Now, I'm not going to worry about life cycles for now, but just know that we're going to go ahead and deploy to some environment somewhere. So you can see here I'm doing deployment. I have sections here for other types of things like packages, Git resources, variables, etc., artifacts. These are all the things that go into doing a deployment as part of a release. So examples might be, here's a set of files that I want to push to let's assume a website. Here's a bunch of files I want to push to a web server. These are images, these are CSS files, these are a formulation of a Git archive, etc. A zip archive. There may be a set of variables that I also want to persist as well. These are the variables that differ from environment to environment. These and all these other aspects that go into release are all going to be persisted here as part of that release. That's why we call it a snapshot. All right, so now we've done this release. The last thing for us to do is to deploy this. So let's go ahead and deploy this to production. And this last stage basically allows us to control how we do a deployment. So you can say here when you want to do the deployment, either now or later. So I can schedule these deployments. I can also specify the priority. So priority is a new feature of Octopus that allows you, if you have a lot of deployments going on, you can make this a high priority deployment if you wish. I can also choose a series of steps that I want to exclude from this deployment if I wanted to. So I might have like tens of steps here, and I can say this one, and this one I don't want to include in the deployment. I can specify a failure mode. So sometimes deployments fail. You have latency in networks. You may have a server that's not responding. How do you want to go about the process of managing errors during a deployment? You may want to issue a rollback policy. You may want to go into what's called guided failure mode, which basically, as it says here, if an error is encountered during the deployment, Octopus will pause and allow you to correct the error before proceeding. So we give you a mechanism of controlling these deployments, which is a lot better than, say, a deployment script, which is typically a fire and forget type process. Basically, you kind of cross your fingers and hope for the best. So we give you a feature here called guided failure mode. Once these things are all defined, we can then click on deploy, and we will create the deployment and issue it to our infrastructure. Now, the infrastructure that I'm deploying to is a hosted runner. There's no target involved here, but the important thing to note here is that we give you a task log of everything that's happening when you do a deployment. So you can see here we're giving you a full rundown of everything that's going on. I can choose if I want to give me a verbose output here. So we give you full auditing and compliance capabilities here as part of that process. If I want, I can simply go to the task summary as well if I wanted to take a look at this. But you'll notice a few things that are worth noting here. I have where it was ran, any artifacts that were involved, the history of this deployment, etc. So there's lots of features there. And hooray, it succeeded. So we get the nice rocket ship. You can see who ran that deployment, what version ran on that deployment, what environment that was running on, etc. So this gives you that sort of visibility into that scope. So here you can see there's my release, 0.0.1. That was the one that I defined earlier. I have my staging and my deployment, staging, and production environments. And you can see now I have 001 in development, excuse me. So if I wanted to, I could then say, yep, I'd like to now prepare a version of this for staging. Notice that we have, as part of our life cycle here, defined that we cannot go and skip staging as part of this process. So we have to deploy to staging first before deploying to production. So these and other concepts you'll understand as you start using Octopus, but this is essentially in a nutshell what Octopus is. It's a mechanism by which you define your deployment process through a series of steps. You then create releases and then deploy those releases to your environments. Now, there's obviously a whole bunch of other stuff that we could take a look at here, but essentially that's Octopus in a nutshell. That is essentially what Octopus looks like from a demo perspective. So let me go ahead and jump back into my slides here and talk a little bit more about Octopus itself. So what you saw was, as I said, a very simple example, but as you get into what Octopus is and how it works, you'll start to understand there's lots of power and flexibility built in here. So first and foremost, we give you a visual representation of your deployment process. This is really, really critical to understanding what your deployments are doing. So we give you a rundown of the steps involved, the conditions involved in those steps. As I mentioned before, you can have steps that run in parallel. You can have steps that run on only certain conditions, like, hey, this previous step failed, so run this step as a reconciliation step. In addition to that, we give you integrated markdown, so notes giving other members of your team insights as to what these steps are and how they work. We also give you, as I mentioned, the ability to run steps in parallel. This is what we call parallel step execution. These are denoted by symbols inside of your deployment pipeline. We give you environment labels as well. So these labels allow you to see which environments these steps will deploy to. So you can have certain steps only run on certain environments. So I can say that this step will only occur in development, and this step will only occur in production. Now you might ask yourself why you'd want to do that. A good example of this is a step that only runs inside of development might be something like, I want to set up some debug capabilities for my development environment. A good example of something that might run in production might be a step we have called manual intervention. A manual intervention is basically asking a human, please approve this step. So you can have aspects of your deployment do just that. You can have a person, essentially a deployment will be blocked until someone comes along and clicks approve. So that's called a manual intervention step, and we have that built into Octopus. So these and other environment variables, parallel step execution, visual representations, etc. These are all sorts of things that you'll see in Octopus as you start to use the product. Let's talk a little bit more about the why Octopus deploy. So I mentioned this earlier, but basically we're looking for creating what we call reliable and risk-free deployments with rollback capabilities. This is the number one reason why people use a product like Octopus. Deployment scripts are too brittle. They don't have these capabilities built in. You have to build them yourself. There's also concepts that we have built in, like environments that really are not represented well inside of other products that do CI. A phrase that we also say a lot is CI is not CD. A lot of folks tend to do their deployments within their CI process. That is a mistake. CI processes are not where you do deployments. You hand that control over to a deployment process to do CD. And so CI is not CD. They are two different animals. And so using a product like Octopus allows you to do CD and deployments in a very consistent manner. We also have built-in rollback support as well. That turns out to be really, really useful, especially if a deployment fails. You want to be able to revert changes quickly and easily. We are a release management tool that supports operations teams as well. A feature we haven't talked about yet, but is built into the product, is a feature called runbooks. Runbooks are basically like automation scripts that you can run on things like infrastructure. They typically define routine or emergency tasks. And the nice thing about this is that you can set these things up with permissions and everything, and your automation or DevOps teams can come along and run them without having to continually prompt for creds or being able to have a well-defined script procedure. An example of a runbook might be something like upgrade a database to the latest version, or configure a web server to be locked down as much as possible, or restart a website. These and other types of operations are things that you'll define as runbooks. And again, like deployment processes and like deployments themselves, these things are fully auditable. So you get a running log of who ran what one runbook and when. That's a bit of a tongue twister. You can also see when the changes occurred, etc. You also define your runbooks in the same way. That is through a series of steps, and you get a visual representation of that. If you're utilizing containers, we're fans of containers. So if you're shipping to Kubernetes, for example, you're wanting to utilize containers without having to use a command line, you can certainly utilize Octopus for that. We have built-in support for all of this. We can do YAML-based deployments. We can execute and deploy via Helm, if you wish, which is a tool for doing deployments to Kubernetes. This is all obviously supported through a user-friendly UI, which makes it really, really popular. Another feature that we haven't touched on yet, but is hugely powerful for a lot of customers, is a feature we call tenants. So an example of a tenant might be something like, let's say I'm managing a pet clinic, and I have different locations for those clinics around the country. Let's say I'm in the US, I have clinics in the West, I have clinics in the East. I may want to deploy different versions of my application, let's say it's a website, of my clinic management software to those different geos. And so tenants are a way of basically defining those things and allows me to control different versions of that software to those locations. So we are the only deployment tool that supports this. This is what we call multi-tenancy, and multi-tenancy turns out to be hugely important for customers who have more advanced or mature deployments. We've noticed consistently that customers who use Octopus for a long time eventually gravitate towards tenants, and it's a feature that they're like, no, please, I need this feature. This is an awesome feature. The reason why is because it alleviates them the pain of having to come up with custom scripts for each and every geo that they support, or every clinic, or whatever it is you want to use as an example. The thing that I touched on consistently is the fact that out of the box, we have governance, compliance, and risk management built in. Whether you're doing a deployment and you're wanting to trace who did what and when, or you're wanting to integrate with other products. Some examples might be like Jira Service Management or ServiceNow. These are integrations that we support. I'll show you a site that highlights all of this stuff. But essentially, you can control your deployments through third-party products. So ServiceNow is a very popular product for doing something like this. So ITSM allows you to basically define approval processes as part of this. So you can approve a deployment within ServiceNow, and Octopus will adhere to that until approved. And so these and other types of integration parts we have. If you're wanting to stream your log files to a third-party provider, that's fine as well. So we support out of the box products like Sumo or Splunk if you want to use those for log aggregation and analysis. So whether it's built into the box with Octopus or integrated through third-party products, that is something that we support as well. All right, well, let's jump into another demo here, highlighting what's available out of the box. So the example I cited earlier was sort of a personal instance of mine, but we have a variety of other examples we can take a look at as well. Again, just to remind you, if you have any questions of anything you've seen here, feel free to ask. I'm happy to answer them in the comments pane. So in this example here, we have a number of spaces available. This is our samples instance that I'm just going to highlight here. Let's take a look at that example here called tenants that I'd highlighted before. So inside here, I have a variety of projects. Let's say I have a car rental here for defining these things. You can see my deployments, and these are my tenants defined for this. So I have, for my car rental company, this fictitious company I'm running, I have an office in Des Moines, I have an office out of the LA airport, and then I have an office in Norfolk. So these are my tenants that I can deploy to. And as you can see, I have different environments for each one of these tenants, as well as different versions of those tenants being deployed to each one of those. In some cases, for certain deployments, or tenants in this case, I don't have a notion of a development environment. So I simply go to test and staging, for example. So these are variations of what you can define as part of these processes. And these processes can vary as well. So you can see that these processes, as you define, these deployment processes can vary. So and as an example here, some examples of really powerful processes might be, I'm going to notify my team via Slack, hey, I'm doing a deployment. This may be an automated process, of course. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a database if it doesn't exist in MySQL. I'll notify the DBAs, hey, if I'm going to production, hey, there's a deployment process here that I need you to approve. I mentioned this earlier. It's a feature called manual intervention. Manual intervention basically says, go grab a human by the shirt, bring them over to Octopus and click on approve on the deployment. This is really important for something like production. You don't want to deploy to production without some human eyeballs looking at it first. Maybe. I mean, it depends on how you define these things, but this is what we're doing. So we're notifying the DBAs, hey, there's a deployment process or that's kicked off. DBAs, please come and approve it. Once approved, it will execute database changes via an integration with Flyway. So this is a Flyway step that we've executed. Maybe I want to deploy to Azure. I'll display as part of a link using a script step. I want to display a link, and then I update a Slack, either success or fail. So these and other sorts of deployment processes you'll define as part of this, and you can see how these things run in that context. We have other examples as well, but this is what a typical deployment step process will look like. You'll have a series of steps that run, and you'll have these defined across a variety of projects. There's a whole permissions model that underpins this as well. So you can define users, and we have permissions defined across these things, which is really nice and powerful. So yeah, lots of stuff to consider as part of this. Kind of jumping or switching gears over to how these things get kicked off. So an example might be GitHub Actions. So here I am inside of our samples repo, Octopus shop. And inside here, I have a YAML description that defines a series of steps for a GitHub action. So YAML is the language used as part of this process. We have a series of GitHub actions defined for performing actions against Octopus. So if you wanted to communicate from GitHub to Octopus, this is typically how you'll do it within GitHub Actions. We have actions defined here for doing just that. So I can define things like, I want to create a release based on this criteria here, and I want to go ahead and perform a deployment as part of that process. So these and other sorts of steps you can do within the context of GitHub. We also support things like Azure DevOps. So you can see we have some built-in steps here for creating releases or deploying or pushing packages. So you can do these things in the context of GitHub Actions if you want. We also support TeamCity from JetBrains. So we are the most popular integration inside the JetBrains marketplace. So we have the most downloads, etc. But you can certainly integrate with that as well if you so wish. So that's some examples there of what it might look like from an integration perspective. Awesome. So there you go. 38 minutes in, you've learned how Octopus works and most importantly, why you should use it. You've learned a little bit about some of the concepts that we have built in, like projects, a deployment process, and releases. We've also touched on tenants. We talked a little bit about what environments are. We did talk about life cycles, but that's something that you'll learn more about as you work with Octopus. We defined a deployment process. You saw how it was built as a series of steps. You saw some more elaborate examples. And then finally, I just showed you how you might integrate within a CI process or server. Now, a question that comes up often is like, look, I'm willing to use Octopus. It's great, but I'm worried there's a sort of esoteric technology I might use, or there's a step that you don't build or support out of the box. What do we do there? Well, it turns out we have a whole series of steps that have been built by the community. We have over 500 steps that have been built by the community to support those technologies. In fact, let's just jump back into the example that I was showing you earlier, and we'll see what that looks like here. Sorry, one sec. Oh, we have a question. That's good. Questions are good. Let me bring this up here. So Donna asks, you talked about rollback. How do those take place? Would be great to hear about an automated and a manual example. So a rollback is essentially a process by which we revert the changes that have occurred within Octopus. And so you can control those aspects as part of your deployment process. Let me just take a look here at the example. Great, there we go. So if I jump back here, so here as part of your deployment processes itself, you'll define our deployments, and we can see that when we've done a deployment, a rollback would be something in the context of a deployment that has failed, for example. So I can certainly take these back if I wish, and I can control how those things occur within the context of my environment. So this is a feature built in as part of Octopus itself, and it really depends on how you want to define these things, but they can be automated or they can be manual depending upon how you wish to define them. But they are a process by which we revert changes occurring from a deployment itself. So within the context of Octopus, we can certainly control those things as part of your deployment processes. It can have implications. Some rollbacks may be really complicated in some cases that requires a little bit more intervention. So an example of that might be something where if a deployment process fails, it's important to use tools that support these things, like in the case of a schema update in a database. But those things are really important to look at. So just by way of example, I just wanted to show you this quickly here. If we go back into the process here, I mentioned earlier, if you're worried that we don't have a step built in out of the box, we do have a series of steps that have been built by the community. So these are called community steps. And given my real estate here, you can see I've got all these steps built in out of the box for a variety of technologies. I just wanted to show you what these things look like. So you can see we've got a variety of steps here for a variety of different technologies, whether you're using things like Redis or you're using targeting Windows itself. These and other steps we define as part of this. You can also check these things out if you wish. There's a site that we have called our integrations site, which is here. So if you go to octopus.com/integrations, there you'll find a site that looks like this. And what this is a series of integrations that we support out of the box for a variety of technologies. So if you wanted to read more about how we integrate with a variety of solutions, you can take a look at this site. And we highlight all those solutions as part of this, which is great. So jumping back to the example here, we highlight those same environments here. But if we take a look at an example, like let's say we want to do a Argo rollout or deployment, I can install and utilize this step as part of this process, or I can use other aspects of this if targeting something like Argo. If I jump back into the community steps again, you can see I've got other things like Chocolatey integration. So if I want to do a package deployment via Chocolatey, which is a package manager for Windows, I can do that. So these and other sorts of capabilities are built out of the box as part of Octopus, which is great. Cool. Jumping back to the slide, just wanted to mention a couple of other things. So as I cited at the beginning, you can either download and install Octopus on your own infrastructure, or you can run Octopus via the cloud. So we provision for you a cloud instance. The examples I've just showed you are running on my cloud instances, but you can certainly download and install this if you wish. We have a variety of other tools available from our downloads page, which is cited here. We have a CLI or command line interface that you can use to talk to Octopus via a terminal window or a command line. That turns out to be really powerful, especially if you're defining automations and you want to talk to Octopus through a automation process. We also have a What's New page. So if you're at all curious, you can check this out at octopus.com/what's new. And there you'll see a page that looks like this. It runs down all our new features that we have built into both Octopus Cloud as well as Octopus Server. We also have our roadmap, which is at roadmap.octopus.com. In fact, let me take a look. I'll show it to you here. So roadmap is basically our means of trying to get all my slides here. Sorry about that. All right. So our roadmap is essentially a series of new capabilities built into Octopus. So this is what it looks like. If you go to roadmap.octopus.com, you'll see a page that looks like this. We have 3 sections of our features: under consideration, planned, and released. You can see what we've shipped and when, and you can drill into each one of these. You can see what the feature is and also a rundown description of it. And most importantly, you can tell us down here at the bottom how important this feature is to you. So you can vote on these features and let us know. If you have an idea for a feature, you can also submit your own ideas through this site as well. So that's available at octopus.com/roadmap or roadmap.octopus.com. Awesome. So as I mentioned before, we have our roadmap. We also have our community, which is at octopus.com/community. You can join our Slack discussions that are there. We have over 6,000 folks in our Slack channels, which is great. We have a bunch of other resources as well. Some other resources I just want to cite earlier, or I cited earlier, but I'll just mention again. So we have our roadmap, as I said. We have our integrations page. We also have our YouTube page as well. So our YouTube channel is available here. We have a bunch of videos that are there. We published almost weekly at this point, if not twice a week. We have a bunch of videos that you can check out there if you're at all curious about what these features are and how they work. If you're all curious to take a look at what it is we're dealing with when it comes to Kubernetes deployments or deployments to databases, etc., you'll find these up on our YouTube channel. And then finally, if you have any questions at all, you can reach us or reach me at this email address, or you can check us out at octopus.com. We have our docs page, as I mentioned earlier, and we have our YouTube channel, as I mentioned as well. Awesome. So, that being said, let's just jump back. Great. I don't see any other questions, which is great, or maybe not great. So there you go. So yeah, there you go. That's your tour of Octopus for this month. We do these every month, and we answer questions live here. But if there aren't any other questions, I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. Don't forget, you can check out Octopus at octopus.com. Feel free to download a trial. You can set up a cloud instance as well for free. And good luck with kicking the tires, so to speak. And we're always available for if you have any questions. And I'm just wasting time to see if there are any other questions. I don't see any other questions. Great. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap up the webinar. Thanks again for your time and attention, and we'll see you on the next one. Happy deployments, everyone. Take care.